Picture this. In a kingdom where a woman's worth was often measured by how quietly she could fade into the background, perhaps even die in childbirth, one concubine dared to look around at every man who told her no, and started writing their obituaries instead. She wasn't just ambitious, she was a force of nature, a political earthquake in silk robes. By the time she was done, she'd carved her name into history as the only woman in 4 millennia to sit on the dragon throne, not as a regent, not as a consort, but as the emperor herself. Welcome, my friends, to the brutal, brilliant, and utterly captivating 57-round death match that transformed Wu Zetian. An insignificant 5th-tier consort, barely a blip on the imperial radar, into Wu Zetian, the emperor who weaponized motherhood, played chess with human lives, and redecorated the palace with the metaphorical and sometimes quite literal bones of her enemies. Ready to count the bodies? Because trust me, there are quite a few. But first, quick roll call. Where are you watching from? Drop your country, city, or your nearest Tang Dynasty-era reincarnation coordinates in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how far this chaos has spread. And hey, while you're down there, give the video a like, hit subscribe, and ring that little bell. Not because the algorithm demands it, though it definitely does, but because this story's about to go from palace drama to full-on historical horror movie mode. All right, let's get bloody. So, let's set the scene. 7th century Chang'an. Imagine, if you can, New York, Las Vegas, and ancient Rome crammed inside one magnificent set of walls. This wasn't just a city. It was a sprawling, pulsating heart of an empire. Silk, shimmering and opulent, was everywhere, draped over mandarins and merchants alike. Poets, fueled by endless cups of rice wine, stumbled through moonlit gardens, composing verses that would echo through history. And the bureaucracy? Oh, the bureaucracy was so mind-bogglingly vast, so intricately layered, they actually needed an exam just to hire the poor soul responsible for sharpening pencils. It was a world of immense power, subtle intrigue, and rigid social order. Into this vibrant, cutthroat world, Wu Zetian was born in 624. Her father was a middle-rank official, nothing particularly special in the grand scheme of the imperial court. He certainly wasn't a duke, or even close to one. It meant they had some standing, some comfort, but certainly no inherent claim to power or exceptional privilege. Legend, however, whispers that her mother had a rather auspicious dream. A phoenix, that mythical bird of immortality and good fortune, supposedly perched on their family roof just before Wu's birth. Her father, a pragmatist facing daily realities, probably just saw the tax bill for their humble estate and cried into his tea. Life for a young girl in the Tang Dynasty, even one from a respectable family, followed a fairly predictable path: marriage, children, managing a household. But Wu Zetian was destined for anything but predictable. At the tender age of 14, her life took an abrupt turn. She was drafted into the palace as a talented lady. Now, that sounds rather grand, doesn't it? A talented lady. But in reality, it was a rank 5 position, barely above a servant. Think of it as being the lowest rung on a very tall, very slippery ladder. Her duties? Well, let's just say she was less a muse and more a glorified photocopy girl who occasionally had the distinct honor of warming the elderly Emperor Taizong's feet. Not exactly the stuff of imperial legends, is it? Here's where our first major twist comes in, and it's a doozy. Emperor Taizong, the powerful ruler Wu served, eventually dies. In the rigidly structured world of the imperial court, Tradition dictated a stark and rather cruel fate for childless consorts like Wu. They were expected to shave their heads, don drab robes, and spend the rest of their lives in a convent, praying for the soul of a man who, let's be honest, probably barely remembered their name among his hundreds of concubines. It was a life of quiet oblivion, a slow fade into irrelevance. But Wu Zhao wasn't built for quiet oblivion. As the funeral incense still wafted through the palace halls, as the court mourned, or pretended to, Wu saw not a convent, but an opportunity. She eyed the new emperor, Taizong's gangly, sickly son, Gaozong, like a drowning woman spotting a lifeboat. And she didn't just look, she acted. She seduced him, right there, practically while he was still sniffing incense at his father's funeral. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated nerve of it. You can imagine the scene. Court censors, those moral guardians of the empire, lost their collective minds. Monks fainted dramatically, clutching their prayer beads. The entire court was aghast. But Gaozong? He just shrugged. "She's interesting," he apparently mumbled. That seemingly innocuous phrase, that casual observation, would become the most astronomically expensive pickup line in the entire history of China. It set in motion a chain of events that would redefine an empire. There was just one rather significant problem, one small detail that stood in the way of Wu's ascent. Gaozong already had an empress, Empress Wang, a woman of noble birth and immense influence. And he had a powerful favorite consort Xiao, who had already borne him several children, cementing her position. These were not minor players. These were two formidable women, each with her own network of allies and deep roots within the imperial establishment. They saw Wu for what she was, a dangerous, ambitious outsider, a crazy ex-girlfriend who simply wouldn't leave, threatening their carefully constructed world. The stage was set for a truly epic clash of wills. Fast forward a few years to 655. The political landscape has shifted subtly but significantly. Empress Wang, despite her high status, still had no children of her own, a major vulnerability in the imperial court. Concubine Xiao, while having 4 children, lacked the empress's deep aristocratic connections. Wu, ever the strategist, had been busy. She now had a daughter and, conveniently, a brand-new son, bolstering her own position. The stakes were impossibly high. Then, one night, the unthinkable happened. Wu's infant daughter was found dead in her crib. The palace was plunged into shock, then suspicion. Ancient sources, particularly those written by later Confucian historians who had every reason to demonize Wu, wasted no time in accusing her of strangling the infant with her own hands and then, with chilling calculation, framing Empress Wang for the heinous act. Modern historians, with the benefit of hindsight and a critical eye, squabble over the precise truth. Was Wu capable of such an act? Absolutely. Did she orchestrate the death or merely exploit a tragic accident with ruthless efficiency? We may never know for certain. What everyone does agree on, however, is the immediate and devastating impact. Empress Wang lost the emperor's trust overnight. Her fate was sealed. Within months, both Empress Wang and consort Xiao were stripped of their titles, demoted, and unceremoniously stuffed into a side palace, discarded like unwanted flat-pack furniture from a particularly brutal branch of IKEA. Their power, their influence, their very freedom, all vanished. But Wu wasn't one to simply banish her rivals and call it a day. Oh no. Her next move was a masterclass in psychological warfare and brutal vengeance. She renamed the disgraced Empress Wang Pig and consort Xiao Serpent. Then, with a chilling lack of remorse, she had their limbs broken and drowned them in vats of wine. Why wine, you ask? Because cement hadn't been invented yet, and Wu, you see, had a flair for the dramatic. She understood symbolism, and she understood fear. 2 powerful rivals down, 55 more to go in her relentless climb. Now, with her most immediate and potent female rivals eliminated, Wu was officially Empress consort. She had achieved a position of immense prestige, but true, unassailable power still resided with the old guard. The grizzled war horses and venerable ministers who had fought alongside Emperor Taizong and held deep loyalty within the court. These men, steeped in tradition and convinced of female inferiority, were not about to bow down to a former concubine. Wu's fix for this entrenched opposition was ingenious. While Gaozong, increasingly plagued by chronic migraines and other debilitating illnesses, often napped or simply wasn't capable of governing, Wu created what she informally dubbed the Gate of the Phoenix. This wasn't some grand new edifice. It was, in essence, a second headquarters, an alternate power center within the palace itself. Here, while Gaozong rested, she personally reviewed and signed edicts, met with officials, and made critical decisions. Gaozong's chronic illness, far from being a hindrance, became the best co-ruler she could have ever hoped for. It provided her with the perfect legitimate opening to step into the void and exert her will. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, then with increasing brazenness, the reins of power slipped from the emperor's weakening grasp into the firm, unyielding grip of the empress. And then there were the children. Ah, kids. You spend 9 months growing them, 20 years feeding them, and still they try to steal your throne. Wu Zetian, for all her political genius, faced the ultimate challenge from within her own family. In a system where the emperor's lineage was paramount, her sons were both her greatest hope and her gravest threat. Her eldest son, Li Hong, was a promising young man, seemingly destined for the throne. He even showed signs of being a compassionate and reform-minded ruler. But he made a fatal error. He dared to suggest to his father, Emperor Gaozong, that perhaps his mother Wu should retire gracefully from active politics. A noble sentiment, perhaps, but a suicidal one in the context of Wu's court. Li Hong died suddenly, mysteriously. The official cause was illness, but court whispers, those ever-present harbingers of truth and rumor, strongly suggested poison. Wu, it seemed, wasn't about to let anyone, not even her own flesh and blood, stand in the way of her ambition. Her second son, Li Xian, proved equally problematic, though in a more intellectual way. A scholar and poet, he began to write verses that subtly but unmistakably implied his mother had slept her way to power. In an era where even a hint of impropriety could be a death sentence, this was an act of profound defiance. Wu, ever efficient in removing obstacles, had him exiled. Later she ensured he was encouraged to hang himself with a silk cord, a common, if gruesome, method of discreet execution for royals. Her third son, Li Dan, was, by all accounts, far smarter than his brothers. He watched the fates of Li Hong and Li Xian and learned a crucial lesson about survival in his mother's court. He abdicated his claim to the throne before breakfast, practically falling over himself to renounce any imperial ambitions. He then lived under house arrest, spending his days painting horses, a harmless pursuit that posed no threat to his mother's iron rule. He understood that sometimes the greatest power lay in appearing utterly powerless. By 690, Wu had simply had enough of the puppet show. She was tired of pulling strings from behind the scenes. She was tired of the pretense. She was tired of being merely Empress. She wanted the full, undisputed, unadulterated power. So, with a move of breathtaking audacity, she scrapped the Tang dynasty entirely. That's right. She founded her own dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, and proclaimed herself holy and divine emperor. Not empress, not regent, but emperor. It was an unprecedented act, a direct challenge to millennia of patriarchal rule. She even moved the capital to Luoyang, a city she claimed was favored by river spirits who, conveniently, were said to look kindly upon women. The dragon throne, the ultimate symbol of imperial authority, now had a phoenix, the symbol of the Empress, carved proudly on its headrest. The message was clear. A new era had begun, and a woman was in charge. Remember those 57 power struggles I mentioned at the beginning? We've just raced through the first dozen or so. The remaining ones are equally illustrative of her ruthless grip on power and her profound paranoia. These weren't just political skirmishes, they were often brutal, personal purges designed to eliminate any potential threat, real or imagined. Consider this. She executed 36 cousins from her own natal family. Why? Because they apparently rolled their eyes at her birthday banquet. A slight, a perceived disrespect was enough to sign their death warrants. It wasn't about justice. It was about absolute, unquestioning loyalty. Then there was the general who had won Korea, a celebrated military hero who had expanded the empire's reach. His crime? He sneezed without permission during an audience with the Empress. Or so the story goes. A sneeze, a human reflex, interpreted as a challenge to her authority. He was imprisoned, and his fate, like so many others, was sealed. And for a truly bizarre example of her iron will, she once forced 700 officials to walk barefoot over hot coals. Their crime? Excessive paperwork. Hyperbole? Perhaps. The details might be exaggerated by later historians eager to paint her as a monster. But the underlying truth remains. Wu Zetian ruled with an iron fist, demanding absolute obedience and crushing dissent with terrifying efficiency. It's no wonder that Tang-era statues, which once depicted serene, smiling figures, suddenly seemed to stop smiling for a very good reason. Fear was a powerful motivator in her court. But to focus solely on the body count, however sensational, would be to miss a crucial part of Wu Zetian's story. While she was staging her real-life Game of Thrones, consolidating power with brutal efficiency, she was also remarkably balancing budgets like a meticulous nerd with a spreadsheet fetish. She wasn't just a destroyer, she was a builder, a reformer who understood the practicalities of governing a vast empire. Take her economic policies, for instance. She shrewdly changed the land tax system, making it payable in grain rather than in copper currency. This might seem like a minor administrative detail, but it was a stroke of genius. It saved countless farmers from ruinous debt spirals as they no longer had to sell their crops at unfavorable prices just to acquire copper for taxes. It stabilized the rural economy and ensured the granaries were full. She also tackled inflation, a persistent problem in any growing economy. Her solution? She minted new coins so beautifully crafted, so aesthetically pleasing that people actually hoarded them as works of art. This accidental hoarding pulled currency out of circulation, effectively curing inflation without resorting to drastic measures. It was a clever, almost accidental piece of economic engineering. And agriculture, the lifeblood of the empire? Wu Zetian was deeply invested. She commissioned the construction of new irrigation canals, vital arteries that brought water to arid lands. These canals popped up across the landscape like some ancient irrigation canal talk trend, transforming the dry north into a fertile breadbasket that would sustain the golden age of the Tang dynasty. She also promoted the compilation of farming textbooks, ensuring that agricultural knowledge was disseminated and improved. Her most enduring and arguably most revolutionary reform, however, was her turbocharging of the civil service examination system. Before Wu, government positions were largely hereditary, reserved for the sons of aristocrats. She saw the inherent inefficiency and injustice in this system. She expanded the exams, made them more rigorous, and emphasized merit over birthright. Suddenly, a farm boy who could quote Confucius with eloquence and demonstrate administrative acumen had a genuine path to power, a chance to boss around dukes who relied solely on their lineage. This wasn't just a bureaucratic tweak, it was a societal earthquake. Meritocracy, the idea that talent, not birth, should dictate one's position, terrified the old nobility more than any execution, because with these exams, even their own privileged children had to study, had to earn their place. It was a radical step towards a more equitable and ultimately more stable government. And religion? She bankrolled Buddhism like a medieval Kickstarter campaign. While Confucianism was the established state ideology, Wu recognized the power and popular appeal of Buddhism. She used it as a counterweight to the often hostile Confucian elite, supporting its institutions and promoting its teachings. The result? The magnificent Longmen grottos, those awe-inspiring cave temples carved into limestone cliffs, saw an explosion of activity under her patronage, with 2,300 new caves and countless statues commissioned. Wu wanted those stone statues to outlive her enemies, and spoiler alert, they absolutely did. They stand today as a testament to her vision and her power. Of course, even in a meticulously managed empire, utopias have enemies. Wu Zetian's reign, for all its internal consolidation and reform, was not without its external challenges. To the west, the formidable Tibetan horsemen constantly raided the Tang borders, a persistent and dangerous threat. To the northeast, the Khitan tribes periodically torched towns and caused unrest. These weren't minor skirmishes, they were serious military challenges that could destabilize the entire empire. Wu, ever the pragmatist, appointed generals based on one crucial criterion: whoever could keep their head, while she, the Empress, waved a fan menacingly in their face. It was a test of nerve, competence, and absolute loyalty. And it worked. Her generals, knowing the stakes, pushed the empire's borders past the Pamir Mountains, a significant expansion of Tang territory. This meant that Tang tax collectors were suddenly learning Persian pickup lines, a testament to the vast reach of her empire. At home, she was equally innovative in her control. She commissioned the world's first newspaper-ish thing, the court diaries. This wasn't exactly the New York Times, but it was a crucial step in information control. Essentially, it was palace fan fiction, carefully curated news and propaganda printed daily and then read aloud in taverns across the empire. Wu understood, long before anyone else, that if you control the memes, you control the empire. She shaped public perception, disseminated her version of events, and reinforced her image as the divinely appointed ruler. But even the most formidable emperors eventually succumb to the relentless march of time. Age, that great equalizer. began to catch up with Wu Zetian. Court gossips, always eager for a juicy tidbit, began to whisper that her once regal jowls now looked like melted wax. The Empress, never one to tolerate insubordination or perceived weakness, retaliated in characteristic fashion. She promoted her two young, incredibly handsome Zhang lovers, brothers in fact, to positions of immense power and influence. Contemporaries, perhaps with a touch of scandalized awe, compared them to jade trees, implying their beauty and their exotic allure. They became her walking hearing aids, her trusted confidants, and some say her stand-ins at night. Naturally, this scandalous arrangement ignited every bureaucrat's midlife crisis, painting itself as moral outrage. The old guard, already resentful, now had a perfect, salacious reason to plot. The year is 705. Wu Zetian is 81 years old, frail but still fiercely intelligent. The court, however, has had enough. The Zhang brothers, for all their beauty, had become a symbol of her age and perceived decadence. One cold morning, palace guards, their swords drawn and glinting ominously, barged into the imperial chambers. They dragged the Zhang brothers outside, their protests quickly silenced, and unceremoniously lopped their heads into the palace moat. Wu, watching from a balcony, a lifetime of power and violence behind her, tried to bark orders, to command, to assert her authority one last time. But the guards, emboldened by the coup, merely pretended they'd gone deaf. Her reign was over. The next day, under duress, she abdicated in favor of her fourth son, Li Xian, the former poet exile, who, against all odds, had somehow managed to outlive every single one of his siblings. The Zhou dynasty, Wu's personal creation, died after a mere 15 years, and the Tang dynasty was restored faster than you can say retcon. The old order, it seemed, had prevailed. Wu Zetian died just 9 months later, her incredible life drawing to a quiet, almost anticlimactic close. She was buried beside her long-dead husband, Emperor Gaozong, beneath a colossal limestone tablet. But this wasn't just any tablet. It was completely blank. Wu, in a final, defiant, and deeply symbolic act, had ordered it left that way. Her message? History can fill in whatever it wants. She was done explaining herself. She had lived her life, forged her destiny, and now it was up to future generations to make sense of it. So let's talk about that body count again. Contemporary historians, particularly those from the later Tang and subsequent dynasties, eager to discredit her as a monstrous usurper, tally something truly staggering. 36 family members, 1,000+ officials, and at least one emperor of China. It's a grisly ledger. Modern scholars, however, approach these figures with a healthy dose of skepticism. They argue that at least half of those alleged deaths are likely smears, wild exaggerations, and outright fabrications invented by later Confucian scribes. These scholars, deeply entrenched in a patriarchal system, simply couldn't stomach the idea of a woman, especially one as ruthless and effective as Wu, calling the shots. They had every incentive to paint her as a depraved tyrant, a cautionary tale against female rule. Yet even the most generous, most conservative historical math still leaves us with an undeniable trail of corpses stretching from Chang'an to Luoyang. Wu Zetian was not a gentle ruler. She eliminated rivals, often brutally, and she did not hesitate to use violence to secure her power. But here's the fascinating, infuriating contradiction. Flip the coin. While Europe was busy inventing feudalism, splintering into countless warring fiefdoms, Wu Zetian kept China unified, strong, and prosperous. She fed her peasants, ensuring stability. She promoted meritocracy through her civil service exams, opening up opportunities for millions. And perhaps most significantly, she proved unequivocally that patriarchy could bleed. She shattered millennia of tradition, demonstrating that a woman could not only rule, but rule effectively, expanding the empire and overseeing a period of immense cultural and economic flourishing. That profound contradiction, that tension between her ruthless means and her transformative ends, is why her legacy remains such a Rorschach blot. Every era, every ideology sees in Wu Zetian what it needs to see. Mao Zedong, the founder of modern China, famously called her the first feminist, recognizing her trailblazing role in a male-dominated world. A Tang nobleman, one of those who trembled in her presence, would undoubtedly have called her the monster under my bed, a terrifying embodiment of chaos and ambition. And a modern YouTube algorithm? It would probably just call her clickbait incarnate, because her story is simply too compelling, too outrageous to ignore. If this roller coaster ride through history made you rethink everything you thought you knew about girl boss energy, then hit that subscribe button for more stories where ambition writes history in red ink. Drop a comment below. Was Wu Zetian a visionary reformer who pushed China forward, or merely history's worst mom with the highest KD ratio? And hey, share this with that friend who always says women can't handle pressure. Because Wu Zetian didn't just handle pressure, she was the pressure. From concubine warming feet to the undisputed emperor of China, Wu Zetian hacked a path through Tang politics like a player clearing a dungeon on nightmare mode. She murdered kin, outwitted generals, rewrote tax law, and still found time to sponsor some of the most magnificent cave art the world has ever seen. Whether you ultimately see her as a feminist pioneer who broke barriers or a tyrannical cautionary tale of unchecked power, remember this. In a world built entirely to silence her, to relegate her to a footnote, she refused. She absolutely, utterly refused. So, the next time someone tells you power corrupts, smile and say, "Sure, but have you tried being the only woman to ever rule China?" Then perhaps just walk away before they notice the glint of ambition in your eye.